how much she should reveal. Her eyes locked onto Judge Carter's with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen it all and come out victorious every time. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "your mistake was assuming that experience fades with age. That wisdom can be laughed away. That I, Eleanor Lawson, was someone you could dismiss before I even said a word." The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. The young attorneys who had been chuckling earlier now sat frozen, their smirks wiped clean. Even the bailiff, who had been holding back laughter moments ago, straightened his posture. Judge Carter let out a breath, tapping his fingers against the armrest of his chair, trying to maintain control of the room. "Big words," he mused, though there was a slight hesitation in his voice now. "But words don't win cases, Ms. Lawson. Evidence does. Arguments do. And from where I'm sitting, I don't see how you—" Eleanor took a single step forward, interrupting him without raising her voice. "Then I suggest you start paying closer attention," she said coolly. "Because by the time this trial is over, you'll remember exactly who I am." A ripple of hushed whispers spread through the courtroom like a wave. Even Thomas Bennett, the seasoned prosecutor, watched her with newfound interest. Judge Carter exhaled sharply and leaned forward. "Fine," he said, his voice quieter now. "Let's see what you've got." Eleanor simply smiled. The battle had already begun. And she never lost a fight. The document from the judge's desk, but before he could snatch it, Judge Carter placed a firm hand over the paper, his expression darkening. "Not so fast, counselor," he said, his voice no longer carrying the amusement it had earlier. The courtroom was deathly silent, every person holding their breath as the realization sank in. Eleanor Lawson had just turned the entire case on its head. Bennett swallowed hard, forcing a chuckle as he tried to regain control. "Your Honor, surely this is some kind of mistake." But his confidence was crumbling, his polished courtroom bravado slipping away with each passing second. Eleanor simply adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, her face unreadable. "The only mistake," she said coolly, "was assuming I walked into this courtroom unprepared." The weight of her words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Judge Carter read the document one more time, his fingers drumming against the desk. Finally, he set it down and let out a slow breath. "This changes everything," he admitted, his voice tight with reluctant respect. Bennett's face twisted in frustration. "What exactly does it change, Your Honor?" he demanded. Judge Carter lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Everything." A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom as spectators exchanged stunned glances. The young lawyers in the front row, who had once smirked at Eleanor's presence, now sat rigid, their amusement replaced with wide-eyed disbelief. Bennett clenched his jaw, his mind racing for a counterattack. "This doesn't prove anything," he argued, though even he sounded unsure. Eleanor arched a single brow. "Then why are you sweating, Mr. Bennett?" A small chuckle echoed from the back of the room, quickly muffled by a cough. Judge Carter ran a hand down his face, the weight of the situation finally settling on his shoulders. He knew he had underestimated Eleanor Lawson. They all had. He looked at her now, not as an elderly woman who had wandered into his courtroom, but as a force to be reckoned with. Judge Carter exhaled sharply, then gave a slow nod. "Miss Lawson," he said, tapping his gavel once. "Proceed." Eleanor smiled, just a hint, just enough to let them know. The real trial had just begun. Hard, his eyes darting between Eleanor and Judge Carter as if searching for an escape route. But there was none. The courtroom, once filled with laughter at Eleanor's expense, now hung on her every word. Judge Carter inhaled deeply, his frustration barely concealed. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice measured, "if what you're saying is true, this case is effectively over." Eleanor finished for him, her tone unwavering. Bennett's jaw clenched. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We need time to review." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "Time," she echoed, her eyes twinkling with something dangerously close to amusement. "Funny. That's exactly what you and your clients were hoping I didn't have." Judge Carter's gaze flickered back to the document, then to Bennett, then to Eleanor. His pride fought against the truth written in black and white before him, but he wasn't a fool. He knew when he'd been bested. And this wasn't just a loss. This was a public reckoning. He exhaled sharply and straightened in his chair. The court will take a recess while these documents are verified, he announced, though his tone had lost its earlier authority. Eleanor simply nodded, stepping back to gather her things as the room erupted into a frenzy of whispers and hurried discussions. She didn't need to stay to hear what was being said. She already knew. As she turned to leave, Bennett called after her, his voice desperate, almost pleading. "Who are you?" Eleanor paused, then looked over her shoulder. "I told you," she said simply. "I'm Eleanor Lawson." And with that, she walked out, just as composed as when she walked in. But this time, the entire courtroom watched her go, knowing they had just witnessed something legendary. Confidence that once dripped from his every word had vanished. His steps were slower, measured, as if he had aged in the past 15 minutes. Bennett followed closely behind, gripping the mysterious file in his trembling hands, his face devoid of its earlier smugness. The man in the dark suit remained near the doorway, his presence a silent reminder that something had shifted. The courtroom fell into an uneasy hush as Judge Carter took his seat, adjusting his robe with fingers that twitched ever so slightly. His eyes found Eleanor's, and for the first time that day, there was no trace of condescension, only wariness. He cleared his throat. "Miss Lawson," he began, his voice lacking its usual edge, "I believe we need to reassess the circumstances of this case." Eleanor tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Reassess," she echoed, her tone polite but firm. "Or correct a mistake?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Carter exhaled sharply, gripping the gavel in his hand as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. After reviewing newly uncovered information, he said carefully, "This court acknowledges that you are, in fact, the author of the exemption in question and that it remains legally binding." Gasps filled the room. Bennett looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Eleanor remained perfectly still. "Which means," she prompted. Judge Carter's jaw tightened, but he knew there was no way out of this. "Which means," he admitted, "that this case should never have been brought against you in the first place." The reaction was immediate, a collective shockwave of whispers and stunned expressions. Bennett's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. What could he say? He had walked into this courtroom believing he was about to dismantle an old woman's defense. Instead, he had stepped into the ring with a legend. Judge Carter lifted his gavel. "The case against Eleanor Lawson is hereby dismissed." The gavel came down with a decisive crack, but the moment it did, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "That's not enough," she said smoothly. The room stilled. Judge Carter hesitated. "Excuse me?" Eleanor gave him a measured look. "Your Honor, my reputation was dragged into this courtroom today. I was mocked, belittled, and treated as if I didn't belong here." She let the words hang in the air. "I want that corrected. Publicly." Judge Carter's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He had spent years commanding courtrooms, but never had he felt so trapped. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded. "The court formally acknowledges the distinguished career and legal expertise of Miss Eleanor Lawson." His voice was tight. "And apologizes for any undue disrespect she may have endured." Eleanor allowed a small, satisfied smile. "That will do." With that, she gathered her papers, adjusted her jacket, and stood. The courtroom, once filled with laughter at her expense, now watched her in reverent silence. She turned to leave, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and as she passed Bennett, she paused just long enough to murmur, "Next time, Mr. Bennett, do your research." And then she was gone. But no one in that courtroom would ever forget the day they learned the name Eleanor Lawson. They walked into my courtroom. And today, I was proven wrong, spectacularly wrong. He exhaled, shaking his head. I let my assumptions get the better of me. And for that, I apologize. Eleanor studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small nod, she said, "Apology accepted." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Just like that?" he whispered. Eleanor turned to him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Holding grudges is a waste of time, Daniel. Besides, he learned his lesson." She glanced back at Carter. "Didn't you, Judge?" Carter let out a short laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Oh, I did." He hesitated, then added, "You know, I'd like to say this won't happen again. That I'll never make the mistake of underestimating someone based on appearances. But the truth is, the world is full of men like me. And women like you will keep proving us wrong." Eleanor's smirk returned. "That's the way it's always been, Your Honor." Carter gave a small chuckle, then extended a hand. "It was an honor to have you in my courtroom, Miss Lawson." Eleanor glanced at his hand before shaking it briefly. It was entertaining, at least. With that, she turned and walked away, Daniel hurrying to keep up. As they made their way down the bustling city street, he couldn't help but shake his head in amazement. "So, what now? Back to retirement?" he asked. Eleanor hummed thoughtfully. "Perhaps. Or maybe I'll take on another case. Just to keep things interesting." Daniel laughed. "If that's the case, I feel sorry for whoever ends up on the other side of the courtroom." Eleanor's smirk deepened. "So do I." And with that, she disappeared into the city, leaving behind a courtroom full of people who would never forget the name Eleanor Lawson. Eleanor inhaled deeply, her gaze still fixed on the disappearing skyline, as if she could already see the storm brewing. "We prepare," she said, her voice steady but laced with something Daniel had never heard from her before, something close to dread. Daniel swallowed hard. "Prepare for what?" Eleanor turned to him, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "For whatever he's planning." Daniel hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "But Miss Lawson, if he has no legal power, what can he really do?" Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Calloway never played by the rules, Daniel. When he was district attorney, he didn't just manipulate the law, he bent it, twisted it, made it work in his favor. And now?" She exhaled sharply. "Now, he has nothing to lose." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the black envelope still sitting on the courthouse steps where Calloway had left it. "Are you going to open it?" Eleanor glanced at it but made no move to pick it up. "Not yet." Daniel frowned. "But not yet." Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. She took a deep breath, then started walking. "Come on." Daniel hurried to keep up. "Where are we going?" Eleanor's pace was brisk, purposeful. "To see an old friend." Daniel blinked. "A friend? Who?" Eleanor's smirk was brief but sharp. "Someone who knows exactly how Calloway operates." She glanced at Daniel, her expression unreadable. "And someone who hates him even more than I do." Daniel didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. As they walked deeper into the city, the streets humming with life around them, the weight of what had just happened settled into Daniel's chest. He had spent months working for Eleanor Lawson, watching her dismantle opponents in the courtroom with nothing but intellect and sheer force of will. He had thought she was unstoppable. But now, for the first time, he saw something else. Not fear, but something close. Because Eleanor Lawson wasn't just preparing for a legal battle. She was preparing for war. Them. Eleanor's fingers traced the edges of the old newspaper clipping, her expression unreadable. "The legal world turned on me. Former colleagues, friends, they called me a traitor. I received threats, lost clients. And eventually, I walked away. I thought that by taking Calloway down, I was done with all of it." Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "But now he's back." Eleanor nodded, her gaze locked onto the flickering city lights outside her window. "And that means he has a plan." Calloway never makes a move without a strategy. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question lingering in his mind. Do you think he came back for revenge? Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. Calloway isn't the type to waste his time on revenge. He doesn't just want to punish me, he wants to regain power. And if Judge Carter's sudden hospitalization is connected, her jaw tightened, then he's already making his moves. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. So what do? We don't even know what his plan is yet. Eleanor glanced at the documents in front of her, then stood. We start digging. The way we did before. We find out who he's been meeting with, what strings he's pulling. If Calloway is back, then someone is backing him. He's not doing this alone. Daniel nodded quickly, grabbing his notepad. Okay, where do we start? Eleanor exhaled. With the people who still owe him favors. She reached for a different folder, one filled with names of judges, officers, and attorneys who had once been tangled in Calloway's corruption. We find out who's still loyal to him. Daniel looked at the list, his brows furrowing. And if we find them? Eleanor's expression hardened. Then we cut them off before he gets any stronger. Silence filled the room as the weight of the situation settled over them. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the storm that was brewing beneath its surface. But Eleanor knew. Calloway had returned. And this time, she would make sure he stayed buried for good. Nodded, her gaze unwavering. Then help us stop him. Thomas let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Help you? Lawson, I don't owe you a damn thing. You were the one who put me on that stand all those years ago, the one who made me believe the system could fix itself. And look where it got me. He gestured to the cold concrete walls around him. 30 years, Eleanor. 30 years of my life gone because Calloway played the game better than all of us. Eleanor exhaled, guilt flickering behind her otherwise composed expression. I know, she admitted. And if I could change that, I would. But right now, Thomas, we don't have the luxury of dwelling on the past. Calloway is back, and he's already making moves. You may not owe me anything, but you have a chance to make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else. Thomas steadied her, his eyes searching for something, weakness, regret, desperation. He found none. Finally, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. You really think you can stop him? Eleanor's answer was immediate. I don't think. I know. A long silence stretched between them. Then, Thomas exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face before nodding slightly. All right, he muttered. But if we're doing this, you need to know something. His expression darkened. Calloway never worked alone. If he's back, that means someone's helping him. Someone with power. Daniel leaned in. Who? Thomas shook his head. I don't know. But before I got locked up, there were whispers about a contingency plan, a way for Calloway to stay in control even if he lost everything. He called it the network. Judges, politicians, law enforcement, people who owed him favors, people he had dirt on, people who wanted what he could offer. Eleanor's jaw tightened. And you think that network is still active? Thomas nodded. If Calloway is making a comeback, it's because someone in power let him. Daniel swallowed. So we're not just up against him, we're up against an entire system. Thomas smirked bitterly. Welcome to the real fight, kid. Eleanor sat back, processing the information. This wasn't just about Calloway reclaiming his reputation, he was rebuilding his empire. And if he still had allies in high places, that meant he wasn't just dangerous. He was untouchable. Unless she got to him first. Eleanor stood, sliding the phone back into its holder. Thank you, Thomas. Thomas watched her carefully. You really think you can win this? Eleanor's smirk was faint but sharp. I don't lose. As she and Daniel stepped out into the cold night air, Daniel let out a shaky breath. Miss Lawson, this is bigger than we thought. Eleanor nodded, her gaze locked onto the city skyline. I know. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question weighing on him. What do we do now? Eleanor exhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. We burned the network to the ground. Been protecting him all these years has probably made sure his assets stayed buried deep. Eleanor folded her arms. But not deep enough for you. Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. Still sharp, Lawson. I missed that. He exhaled, rubbing his jaw. All right. I can start digging, but it'll take time. Offshore accounts, shell companies, ghost transactions, it's not a simple trail. Eleanor nodded. I don't expect it to be. But we need to move fast. Calloway is making his move, and if we don't find his funding before he solidifies his power, he becomes unstoppable, Vincent finished, his smirk fading. He glanced at Daniel, then back at Eleanor. All right, I'll do it. But you owe me for this. Eleanor gave a small, knowing smile. I always pay my debts, Vincent. Vincent sighed, then motioned for them to follow him inside. The warehouse was cluttered with old filing cabinets, stacks of dusty papers, and multiple monitors running lines of code and financial records. He dropped into a creaky leather chair and started typing. Daniel leaned in, watching the screen. So how do you even start? Vincent didn't look up. You don't chase the money. You chase the people spending it. He tapped a few keys, bringing up a list of financial transactions. If Calloway is back, he's going to need resources, lawyers, security, bribes. Those payments have to come from somewhere. And if I know Calloway, he won't be using his real name. Eleanor watched as numbers and accounts flashed across the screen. So we find the fake names. The proxies. Exactly, Vincent muttered. His eyes scanned the data rapidly, then he suddenly froze. Well, would you look at that? Eleanor and Daniel leaned in. What? Daniel asked. Vincent smirked, tapping the screen. There's been a series of large transfers over the past 6 months, all moving through dummy corporations, offshore trusts, but eventually landing in the hands of a familiar name. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Whose name? Vincent turned, his smirk fading into something more serious. Judge Raymond Carter. Silence. Daniel's mouth fell open. Wait, Judge Carter? The same one from your trial? The one who just got hospitalized? Vincent nodded. Looks like Calloway didn't just return, he came back collecting favors. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She had suspected Calloway had people in his pocket, but this changed everything. Which means, she said quietly, Carter wasn't just a casualty of stress. Vincent gave her a grim look. No. He was a liability. Daniel swallowed hard. Miss Lawson, if Calloway's cleaning house, who do you think is next? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She already knew. She exhaled, her voice firm. Us. Vincent cracked his knuckles. Then I suggest you figure out your next move, fast. Eleanor nodded, her mind already racing through the possibilities. Calloway's network was still active, his money was flowing, and now they had proof that he was using old connections to rebuild his empire. But more importantly, they had proof that Calloway wasn't waiting for them to come after him. He was already hunting them. Eleanor straightened. We need to go. Vincent leaned back. I'll keep digging, but be careful, Lawson. Calloway plays for keeps. Eleanor nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. So do I. She turned, Daniel right behind her, and stepped out into the cold night. The game had officially begun. And this time, she wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to end it, for good. This was the moment that defined her. The culmination of every battle fought, every sacrifice made, every sleepless night spent chasing the truth through a labyrinth of corruption. But Eleanor Lawson knew better than anyone that justice wasn't a finish line, it was a fight that never truly ended. It was persistence. It was resilience. It was standing up, again and again, no matter how many times the world tried to knock you down. The courthouse behind her loomed like a monument to the system she had spent her life trying to protect, yet so often found herself fighting against. The flashing cameras and murmuring reporters faded into the background, their voices a distant hum against the morning air. The real war had never been fought in front of an audience. It had unfolded in the shadows, in whispered conversations and buried evidence, and the unseen hands pulling the strings of power. And it would continue, long after the headlines stopped. As she and Daniel descended the courthouse steps, the city stretched before them, alive, restless, ever-changing. Its streets pulsed with energy, filled with people who had no idea of the battles fought in their name, of the corrupt empires that had risen and fallen while they went about their daily lives. Somewhere, in the gleaming high-rises and hidden alleyways, another secret was waiting to be uncovered, another battle waiting to be fought. Daniel let out a long breath, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "You know, Miss Lawson, most people would take a win like this and disappear. Retire. Enjoy life." Eleanor smirked, adjusting the collar of her coat as a crisp breeze swept through the streets, carrying with it the scent of coffee, asphalt, and the lingering tension of the night before. "Most people don't know what's coming next." Daniel frowned, glancing at her. "You think there's more?" Eleanor's gaze swept across the skyline, the towering glass buildings reflecting the first golden rays of sunlight. "There's always more." The weight of those words settled between them, heavier than anything the headlines would print that morning. Callaway was in chains, the network was fractured, and Senator Hale's carefully built house of cards was collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. But power never truly disappeared, it simply changed hands. There would always be another Callaway, another Hale, another man in the shadows who thought he was untouchable. Daniel hesitated, his voice quieter now. "So what do we do?" Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable but steady, as unshakable as the city itself. "We watch. We wait." And the moment they try to rise again, she exhaled, a slow, measured breath, as if already preparing for the next war. "We remind them why they fell." The city moved around them, unaware of the promise hanging in the air, of the quiet war still being waged beneath the surface. The streets belonged to those who thought they could shape the world in their image, but Eleanor knew the truth. The law wasn't just words in a book. It was the people willing to stand up for it, to fight for it. And Eleanor Lawson was done running. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the pavement, painting the world in shades of gold and fire as she stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, her heels clicking against the concrete. Blending into the pulse of the city. Becoming a part of the fight. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere.